All right, so welcome to lesson 4, which is the Mesozoic era. So in this, we'll talk a little bit about subduction. So subduction, remember, is when a plate collides with another plate and the plate subducts or moves under the other plate. So that is subduction. So that would be a convergent boundary. All right, so when we look at the Mesozoic, there was a mass extinction event that ended the Paleozoic, and then that led rise to a lot of different organisms in the Mesozoic. So we had big reptiles that dominated the land. We had dinosaurs that dominated the land. So that was pretty much what we saw in the Mesozoic. All right, so when we look at this, this is kind of a timeline of what has occurred. So we've got dinosaurs kind of ruling the land here, and then small mammals came to be. And then we had coniferous forests, which are forests that had pine trees. And then phytoplankton producing more oxygen into the atmosphere, flowering plants, and then led rise to the Cenozoic, which we have today. All right, so for Pangaea, when Pangaea broke up, we had when the Mesozoic era began, Pangaea was breaking up, and so basically, Pangaea is a whole continent, kind of like Rodinia was at the beginning of the Paleozoic. So we had Pangaea. Pangaea is breaking up, and that created a split of the continents, which created organisms being kind of separated and not being able to mingle, and change climate for sure. All right. So when we had this occurring, we had a separation of oceans. So when Pangaea was around, we had one ocean. And then once it started to break up, we had kind of a widening of seas and oceans, and we had some kind of inland seas, like I've talked about in the West, like the Great Salt Lake, for example. We had the Atlantic Ocean forming. So as Africa and South America, North America, and Eurasia started to split, we had the formation of the Atlantic Ocean. So that started to form along with this Pangaea breaking apart. All right, so we've also talked about sea level change. So sea level can change as ice ages occur, and then ice ages disappear. So we've got warming and cooling trends. So sea levels are rising and falling. So we had kind of a regular occurrence of ice ages. So sea levels rose, sea levels fell, which created some inland seas and then created some kind of deserty areas as those dried up. All right, so you can kind of see right in here we have this inland sea. So you can see that this was covered in ocean. And so nowadays it's not. And this is where we have the Great Salt Lake, and we have a lot of our oil deposits. And so our oil deposits are found here because that's where we have evaporites. And we also have, I talked about it in the last note. So evaporites occur usually where we have oil deposits. Well, we have both of those where we have shallow seas. And so that's definitely what's occurring right here. And then a lot of our other oil reserves are here in Saudi Arabia. And that's also where we had shallow seas. So they really kind of occur together. All right, so during Pangaea breakup, we also had mountain building forming. So we had a lot of different mountain ranges occurring. We had the current Rockies starting to form. And we also had the Farallon plates starting to collide with North America. And that's what produced the Rocky Mountains, and also what eventually led to the Juan de Fuca plate forming. All right, so here's our Farallon plate, and here's North America, and then the Pacific plate. So as it collided throughout the years, so you can see this is 56 million years ago to 30 million years ago to 20 to today. And so here's our little Juan de Fuca plate. So our Juan de Fuca plate is kind of the remnants of that Farallon plate. And so we still have subduction here occurring. That's what creates the Mount Lassen, Mount Shasta, and all of the Cascade volcanoes. And that's why we don't have volcanoes down here. So we don't have subduction occurring. We used to. So some of these, like the Yosemite Valley and things, are volcanic, but not anymore. And so that's because we used to have subduction, but now we don't. So we just have subduction along the northern part, so Lassen to up north. All right, so as the Farallon Plate descended, it kind of pushed up North America and created the current Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas. So the Sierra Nevadas and the Rocky Mountains were both um, formed by that Farallon Plate colliding. All right, and so we can see this shallow sea that used to occur in here. So the Great Salt Lake is kind of in here. That's pretty much the remnants of this shallow sea. The reason it still remains is because there is no inlet, so there's no water flowing into it, and there's no outlet, so there's no water flowing out of it. So it kind of remains just this shallow, salty lake. But we have most of our, if we look at like our oil deposits here in the U.S., most of our oil deposits occur in this area, and that's because we used to have a shallow sea there. All right, so mountain building. So we've got Laurentia here. This is our original landmass. And then we've got some pushing up of plates as Pangea collided and broke apart. And so we've got our Appalachians over here. We've got our Rocky Mountains here, and also our Sierra Nevadas, which are right here. So all of those occurred during this time. And this is the Cordilleran orogeny. So it's the mountain building of the Sierra Nevadas and the Rocky Mountains. So that was all during this time. And then here's the Farallon Plate colliding with North America. And so you can see the Sierra Nevadas were volcanic at one point, but they're not anymore. And so that's just because the plate dynamics have changed. And this also created the Rocky Mountains over here. So you can see pre-Rocky Mountains and then current Rocky Mountains along with the Sierra Nevadas. And then we have California over here. All right, so Pangea broke apart, and this created more dynamic ocean life. So instead of just having there be one ocean, there was more of a dynamic ocean life. So new marine organisms formed to create and fill different niches. Photosynthetic plankton occur, so that created a different environment for marine organisms to be able to eat and thrive. So that was kind of occurring all along this Mesozoic time. So phytoplankton, those are photosynthetic things. They're alive today. They're actually, what's interestingly enough, phytoplankton are what the largest creatures on Earth, the blue whale, which is the largest creature on Earth, eats. So it's kind of funny that the largest creature on Earth eats the smallest organisms on Earth. But it's phytoplankton. And so phytoplankton create a lot of oxygen today. So about half of our oxygen on Earth today is created by phytoplankton. So it's pretty cool. But they're these tiny organisms, and this would be under a microscope that you would see this. And they're floating around in the ocean and producing oxygen. All right, so plant life flourished. So we've got different types of trees. So we've got Sitka trees, ginkgos. So the picture on the left is a Sitka tree, and then a ginkgo is on the right. And then pine trees, other conifers, which are like pine cones, kind of like pine trees. Those all flourished during the Jurassic. And then something else that developed during the Jurassic and the Mesozoic was the amniotic egg. So an amniotic egg is like, think of a chicken egg, for example. So a chicken egg has the yolk and it has the white part on the outside. And so that's an amniotic egg. And so reptiles, birds, they all have amniotic eggs. And these are very dominant and allowed organisms to kind of dominate land because they didn't have to care for their eggs like amphibians, for example. Amphibians lay eggs, but they have to be enclosed in water. And they have certain conditions, whereas this is fully enclosed. So it doesn't matter what the conditions are. It could be wet, it could be dry, it doesn't matter. But the organism can survive. So that was really really useful for desert regions and things like that because amphibians need moist conditions. All right, so one type of reptile was an archosaur, and this was kind of the first organism to develop a bipedal kind of stance. So that means like walking on two legs. So it has to do with hip structure. So if we look at the hip structure of organisms, we know if they walked upright or not because of their hip structure. So there's a certain hip structure that allows them to be downright, or a hip structure that allows them to be upright. And so these were the first kind of dinosaurs or organisms that were able to walk upright, kind of like the picture on the right. And then of course, we had a mass extinction. So this mass extinction was due to climate change, like all mass extinctions. But it was also due to the fact that an asteroid hit the Earth and that created a major climate change. And they also think it was due to a massive amount of volcanic eruptions, which also creates differences in climate. So ultimately, it's climate, but this has to do with an asteroid. And that's what kind of created the demise of the dinosaur. And so we can see that evidence of the asteroid off of the Yucatan Peninsula. So right in here, this is North America. This is the kind of Central America here. And so this is the Yucatan Peninsula. And we can see a crater similar to this crater in Arizona here. And so we can measure the age of this. We can see satellite views of this, and we can tell that the age of it. And we can see that it's exactly 65 million years ago, exactly when the dinosaurs became extinct. And so, and then we can see also rock records, different layers of rock, and we can see ash and things that are in the atmosphere that created kind of this blanket of yuck that created not so great of a living environment for the dinosaurs.
Welcome to the third installment of our mini-series on the history of life on Earth. When we left off, life had been brought to its knees by a mass extinction at the end of the Paleozoic era. The Mesozoic era, from 251 to 65 million years ago, followed the Great Extinction and would produce some of the weirdest and most fascinating animals of all time, including the dinosaurs. It also led to most of the major land animal groups we know today. Like other eras, the Mesozoic is divided into periods, in this case 3 of them. The first period, the Triassic, lasted from 251 to 199 million years ago. It was a time of transition, when the dominant vertebrates of the late Paleozoic, the Therapsids, pretty much disappeared. A new group of reptiles, the dinosaurs, then rose to become the Earth's new dominant land vertebrates. Throughout the Mesozoic, Earth was warmer than it is now, and it had no polar ice caps. At the beginning of the Triassic, the Earth's land masses were lumped together into the dry supercontinent Pangaea. Slowly, life started to repopulate the place. Repopulating meant diversifying. The Therapsids were declining, but a new group of vertebrates was starting to take over, the Archosaurs. Archosaurs descended from one of the earliest major groups of land vertebrates, the Diapsids, at the end of the Paleozoic. These major animal groups, the Archosaurs and the Diapsids, are defined by holes in their skulls, which attach to muscles and mean that big, heavy bones weigh a little less. It might seem like kind of a strange way to tell these animals apart, but it's actually a very clear marker. Diapsids have 2 openings behind their eyes. Archosaurs have 2 extra openings, one in front of the eye and one in the lower jaw. Dinosaurs are archosaurs, but so is another group that almost took over instead of the dinosaurs, the Pseudosuchians, which evolved very similar body plans to dinosaurs that came later, including standing on 2 legs. They came in a lot of different shapes and sizes, but if you want to know what a Pseudosuchian looked like, picture something a bit like a crocodile, but about 12 times more terrifying because it's able to stand up straight on its long legs and run really fast over land. Pseudosuchians were nearly wiped out in another mass extinction at the end of the Triassic. Only one lineage survived, one that took to living in swamps and gave rise to modern crocodiles and alligators. Although, thankfully, the modern versions don't run around on 2 legs. The only other archosaurs around today are birds. So the archosaurs took over from the Therapsids, which had mostly died out at the end of the Paleozoic. But some Therapsids hung on through the Triassic, and some didn't die out at all, luckily for us. The Therapsids are descendants of another major branch of land vertebrates, the Synapsids, who are also classified by their skull holes. Synapsids have only 1 skull opening, not 4, and they're the ancestors of mammals. The earliest mammals appeared in the middle of the Triassic, at practically the same time as the dinosaurs. Yes, we mammals started out as dinosaur buddies, and we still hang out with dinosaurs now. just in bird form. Speaking of dinosaurs, there probably weren't many Triassic dinos in the coloring books you had when you were 6 because they hadn't developed much yet. But they had some advantages that would eventually make them the ruling reptiles. Like I mentioned earlier, Pseudotsuchians and dinosaurs had very similar body plans. But the dinosaurs had a slight physiological edge. Their breathing was more efficient. And while both groups evolved legs that were positioned straight under them instead of sprawling out to the sides, dinosaurs were the stronger movers. The earliest dinosaurs that we can be confident about go back 230 million years, but there are some very dino-like animals from 10 million years before that. An animal called Nyasasaurus may or may not be a true dinosaur, depending on who you ask, but it's definitely close, and it comes from 243 million years ago in present-day Tanzania. As is often the case with evolution, it's hard to draw the line between true dinosaurs and their immediate ancestors, but somewhere between Nyasasaurus and later dinosaurs like Eoraptor, they had officially evolved, ready to take over the world. A couple of other animal groups turned up during the Triassic. One was the ichthyosaurs, the first reptile group to become fully aquatic again after evolving a land-based lifestyle. They're also one of only 2 groups to evolve a fish-shaped body from a 4-footed animal body, the other group being the whales. Finally, toward the end of the Triassic, a group of archosaurs that were closely related to dinosaurs, but weren't dinosaurs themselves, evolved the power of flight, the pterosaurs. After the Triassic came a period that you might have heard of called the Jurassic period, which lasted from 199 to 146 million years ago. Although I do feel like I need to point out that some of the dinosaurs from the movie franchise are partly or totally made up, and others aren't from the Jurassic at all. During the Jurassic, Pangaea was beginning to separate into 2 continents, Laurasia and Gondwana. Shallow seas covered parts of the land. This is when dinosaurs diversified into their more familiar forms. The Jurassic was a great time to be a sauropod, for example, a huge, long-necked plant eater that walked on 4 legs. Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, and Apatosaurus all lived during the Jurassic. Then there were the theropods, the meat-eaters that walked upright. Allosaurus was one major predator, but even bigger and meaner theropods were yet to come. The Stegosaurus also evolved during the Jurassic. It was a big plant eater with plates all along its back and a spiked tail weapon called a thagomizer, because if you're gonna pick a name for a giant spiky tail weapon, you might as well make it awesome. Meanwhile, the plesiosaurs, a group of reptiles not closely related to dinosaurs, joined the ichthyosaurs in the ocean. There was one other major group of dinosaurs that appeared during the Jurassic: birds. We know that birds are descended from dinosaurs because of the similarities in their skeletons and the fact that many dinosaurs had feathers. And because people who study evolution like to include all of a group's descendants in that group, birds technically are dinosaurs. So if you've ever fed a chicken nugget that's shaped like a dinosaur to a child, That's a weird experience. That's a whole strange thing. Archaeopteryx, which is usually considered the earliest bird, dates back to the Jurassic, and so do lots of other early birds. They, along with the pterosaurs, were the 2 kinds of flying archosaurs during the Jurassic and during the next period, the Cretaceous. The Cretaceous, which means chalk-bearing, lasted from 146 to 65 million years ago and was even warmer than the earlier Mesozoic. The continents continued to drift apart, heading for where they are now. As the seafloor spread, it released carbon trapped in the Earth's crust and caused some serious global warming. Ichthyosaurs disappeared sometime during the Cretaceous, but a new type of marine reptile appeared, the mosasaurs, aquatic lizards related to the monitor lizards we have today, but not closely related to dinosaurs. Another new arrival? Flowering plants, which were excellent at getting animals to spread their pollen. That's why at the same time as flowers, we see pollinators like bees appearing on the fossil record. Whether flowers or pollinators came first is a kind of evolutionary chicken and egg question. Probably neither one of them came first exactly. The flowers and pollinators influenced each other's evolution and became more interdependent as time went on. Mammals, which you'll remember had been around since the Triassic, evolved into the major lineages alive today. Placental mammals like us, marsupials like the opossum, and monotremes like the platypus. The Cretaceous also meant even more dinosaurs, like the frilled ceratopsians and the duck-billed hadrosaurs, and of course, Tyrannosaurus rex. I don't know about you, but I think T-Rex is pretty cool. I'm also very glad that predators that size aren't around today to snack on us. And why aren't they around anymore? Well, like the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic ended in a mass extinction. But there were a few differences between the 2 die-outs. For one thing, the extinction at the end of the Mesozoic wasn't as bad. Only about 50% of the Earth's species went extinct, which, yes, is a lot, but not nearly as many as during the extinction at the end of the Paleozoic, when almost all life died out. And while we don't know exactly what caused the earlier Paleozoic extinction, extinction, we have a major clue about the event at the end of the Mesozoic. It's a crater in the Yucatan region of Mexico. Most scientists agree that a meteor impact at this site must have been what wiped out all of the dinosaurs except for birds. There might have been other factors at play, but the meteor didn't help, so most of the diversity dinosaurs had to offer is gone for good. Yes, birds are very cool, but they represent only one lineage of dinosaurs. Those big four-footed plant eaters and the walking around armored vehicles, they're not around anymore. But once they were gone, mammals had a chance to take over, which is what happened during the Cenozoic, the era that we are still in.